We love a bit of drama from Question Time, and this week they came up with the goods. Konstantin Kisin is co-host of the Trigonometry podcast and an anti-woke pundit. He laid into Douglas Alexander, the Labour minister, on the panel.
I'm not in the business of giving the Labour Party free advice, but I will give some. And perhaps as an immigrant myself and someone who voted Remain at the referendum, I can say this without being shouted down. The attempt to paint your political opponents as being intolerant and bigoted is something that never worked, but people tried it around the referendum. You called half the country racist, that didn't work. Then you called people racist again, that didn't work. The Reform Party, like every other party, has a mixture of people within it. It has a man in it at a senior position called Zia Youssef. Their candidate for the mayor of London is a Muslim. I mean, what are you talking about? All of this politics of division that you talk about is what you did to this country. Let me finish. This is what you did to this country. Under your government, under the Blair government, you brought more people into this country in 10 years than had come between 1066 and the Battle of Hastings and 1950. You brought more people into this country in 10 years than had come in a millennium. And then the Conservative government came in and repeated this and went further. When I came to Britain in 1996, 55,000 people a year net came to this country legally. Today, that is the number of people who come here illegally every year. That is what you've done to this country. So when you talk about the politics of polarization, you did this to this country, you created it, and you're going to reap the whirlwind of the next election.
Let me answer you, Constantine.
So that was the point that Konstantin, clearly wanted to make on that show. I imagine he prepared that. He delivered it well. And though I disagree with him, he was presenting an opinion which is quite widely held in this country, hence the applause he received and the popularity of Reform, the party he presumably supports. Let's see how the Labour minister responded, though.
Because, Constantine, we have a fundamentally different view.
Clearly.
So, Rishi Sunak is no political friend of mine. He was the Conservative leader of the country, as you know. When Fraser Nelson put it to you that Rishi Sunak is absolutely English,
I said he's
what
British.
did you reply?
I said he's British.
You said he's a brown Hindu.
No, that's not what I said. I said
English?
he's British. I said he's
How
British,
is he English?
just like me. I'm not English.
Those are the
either.
words you used.
What I said
we
is,
can hear the code.
There's a difference between
a
British...
brown Hindu.
May I be allowed to say what I said?
Yourself.
There's a difference between saying you're English and you're British. I am British. My children born in this country are not English, but they're British, and that is the distinction I made.
So Rishi Sunak is not English?
No, I don't think he is. I think he's British. He's a
I respectfully disagree. If you live here
if you actually listen
and you're
to
the Prime Minister,
if you listen to Rishi
he's English.
Sunak himself, he said prior to being elected as Prime Minister that he identifies as a British Indian.
I can hear the
So I'm
code.
quoting him. Well, you've clearly got a different
What's his
ability.
colour got to do with it?
It's not about his colour.
You
He
said
himself
brown Hindu.
Yes,
You
he's a
said
British
brown
Indian.
Hindu.
Yes, he's a British Indian.
So why did you mention his colour?
I'm glad you came here with prepared sound
Why
bites,
did you
but they don't
mention-
work anymore.
Why
This is
did
the
you
point
mention his colour?
Because I'm trying to make the point that he's a British Indian, which is what he is, just like I'm of Russian descent in this country and I'm British. It's a very simple point.
I can read the code.
So at the start of that clip, Konstantin denied that he'd said Rishi wasn't English because he was a brown Hindu. He said, I didn't say that. He also went on to Twitter to complain about the exchange. So he said, amusing on Question Time tonight, tried to explain to Labour Minister that calling people racist won't stop people's concerns about uncontrolled mass immigration. So he proceeded to imply that I am racist with pre-prepared misquotes. He says, didn't address a single argument, clip soon. So again, pre-prepared misquotes. Now, unfortunately for Konstantin Kisin, the quote brought up by Douglas Alexander is available for all to see on YouTube.
Do we regard Rishi Sunak as English, for example?
I've always said, this is a very unpopular thing, that I'm not English, I will never be English. I don't think Rishi Sunak is English. We're both British, but we're not English.
No, you weren't born here, you were an immigrant.
No, but my son was born here. I don't think my son is English.
Right.
He's born to a Russian
again,
Ukrainian
that's definition,
immigrant.
right? I would say that Rishi Sunak is as English as Tizer and Wyferns, right? He is absolutely English. He was born and bred here. And I wouldn't say that the colour of his skin makes him any
He's
less.
a brown Hindu. How is he English?
Because he's born and bred here.
So by being born here, you become English, in your opinion?
Yeah.
English, because there's a difference, right?
I don't think English is national. Look, I'm a Scotch, right?
Yeah.
Now, are my kids English? I would say they are.
How?
Because they were born here.
They're Scottish.
Nope.
By blood?
No,
right?
they've hardly ever been to Scotland, unfortunately.
So what?
By blood, so give me this.
That was Konstantin Kisin, I mean, he's an ethnic nationalist. It's a thing. I think it's very dangerous to be an ethnic nationalist in a multicultural society. I mean, I'm not really in favour of it anywhere, but I think in that conversation actually with Fraser Nelson, he does sort of bring up Japan, and there are clearly some sort of countries where the dominant culture thinks that the nation is an ethnic unit, which I'm not really in favour of, but it's clearly especially dangerous in a place which is multicultural, because to wind that clock back is not going to look pretty. Now, Konstantin Kisin saying I suppose he's implying he's not an ethnic nationalist, because he's saying that when it comes to Britain, it's not a race thing, but when it comes to England, it is. He's saying if England is, I can see the argument that if England is an ethnicity, then heritage does come into it. But why should English just be an ethnicity? It's also a nation. It's a football team.
Exactly. Right. And I agree with you. I do think it's quite a dangerous path to go down. And we saw earlier on in the show when we were talking about Gorton and Denton, how remind me of the candidate's name.
Matt Goodwin.
How Matt Goodwin believes the same thing. So now we have, a candidate for the parliament who believes in this, and we have Konstantin Kisin, who has one of the most influential podcasts in the UK. That's not just popular in the UK, it's popular across the world. They've got 1.7 million subscribers. He's been on Question Time, I counted 6 or 7 times. And this is a person who believes that if you're brown, or a brown Hindu, as he exclaimed in quite a shocked way. How can he be English? He's a brown Hindu. It's clearly something that he believes is quite deeply felt for him. That is now a kind of an opinion that buys you a spot on Question Time. Like, I feel like somebody who spoke like that 10 years ago would not have appeared on Question Time 7 times.
It was interesting though that I'm not so fussed about him appearing on Question Time. I mean, he's got a big audience. He clearly represents something that a fair few people think. I suppose what's interesting to me is that Douglas Alexander clearly thought that that was the terrain that was more helpful to Labour. Because obviously, Konstantin Kisin is making a broader point about immigration. Douglas Alexander doesn't quite feel confident enough to defend Labour's record on immigration. So he turns to something which, is the strategic weakness of Reform and the populist right, which is their views on immigration do align with not necessarily a majority, but a considerable number of people in the country. Their views on race and ethnicity and nationhood kind of don't.
Yeah.
So if you look at the polls, like the idea that you have to be white to be English is a really small minority position. Maybe it wasn't a few decades ago, but I think especially because of the English football team.
No, exactly.
The idea that, Bukayo Saka isn't English, I think most people think is ridiculous.
John Barnes, years
you
ago.
Can go way back.
Frank Bruno, much beloved Englishman. Did people years ago very publicly deny that Frank Bruno was English? It was a completely fringe position. I'm not saying that Question Time should necessarily like no platform Konstantin Kisin, because as you say, he is an influential voice. He has a huge podcast. I think the point I'm making more about somebody like that being on Question Time 7 times is that is now an acceptable conversation to have in this country. That is where the Overton window has kind of shifted to. And I saw somebody today saying, this debate on whether Rishi Sunak is English continues. And it's like, well, how is that a debate? Like, how have we got to the stage where it's a debate as to whether somebody born in England is English? And I think that's quite new in the mainstream. And to your point that he got a big round of applause for criticizing Labour for how many immigrants and illegal immigrants had come in under the Labour government. And yes, you can argue that a lot of British people would agree with that. You're right. I don't think that the majority of British people would agree for a second that Rishi Sunak is not English because he has Indian heritage. I don't think that that's a popular position. And it was interesting to see him kind of hit back at Douglas Alexander and say, well, you're calling me a racist. I don't think people need to call them racists. I think people need to explain exactly what it is that they're saying. This is what he believes. He believes that Rishi Sunak is not English because he has Indian parents. And he believes that immigrants are at the root of every problem that we experience in this country. And then let people make up their own minds. And I think a lot of people in the UK will conclude that, yes, that is racism.
I mean, I think sort of what I say is because, you know, if you say you're a racist and they say, well, it's what counts as racism is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose. So more the route I go down, what I always say on this show is you're an ethnic nationalist, which is, you know, you can't deny that because that is what you're saying. Your vision of the nation is ethnic, and ethnic nationalism has very bad outcomes. So whether or not you're a racist, I don't care. You know, he's sort of making the point that reform has Zia Yusuf in a high position. He's sort of saying that, you know, clearly there are reform politicians don't necessarily hate all non-white people, but many of those reform politicians are pushing forward a vision of an ethnic nationhood.
And they push policies that harm non-white people, and they push policies that harm immigrants. So, you know, I agree with you in that I don't think it helps the left to just shout, you're a racist. I believe them to be racist, but I think it's better to dig into the policies and say, this is ethnic nationalism. As you say, what does this mean for people in Britain? What does this mean for immigrant groups in Britain? And what does this mean for non-white people in Britain when that's the level that the conversation has got to when we're talking about, you know, whiteness being true Englishness? You know, what is the conclusion of this discussion and what are the policies that it kind of leads to, right?
Do you think there's a difference though? Because I think where the political center of gravity is that people want to make it a bit harder to come to Britain, which you can say is making it harder for immigrants, which it is. And I would say there's a difference between having a tougher immigration policy, which is always, you know, by definition going to make it harder for immigrants, and sort of pushing back against the idea that England is a multi-ethnic country.
Well, I also mean for immigrant communities who are here already.
So people who are now British citizens.
Yes, exactly. You know, not so much, you know, the small boats argument, or, you know, which I think is, you know, a nonsensical, overblown dog whistle when you look at the amount of people who are actually coming in. But I'm talking about the policies that will have an impact on immigrant groups who live here, or people who have become British citizens here. What would a reform government mean for them? I think that's what we need to be talking about with reform leading the polls.
So they're stripping people retrospectively of indefinite leave to remain was sort of their policy, which most clearly sort of crosses a line.